Today's episode, I'm interviewing Nick Cawthon, who's a leader in design and product strategy with over 20 years of experience working with companies such as Airbnb, Adobe, IBM, and the San Francisco Giants. Now, he's the founder of Gauge.io, a consultancy that leads the innovative product designs of many companies in the Bay Area. He also teaches at the California College of Arts and mentors designers there, as well as UC Berkeley. He's a frequent speaker at Google and Stanford, and Nick is passionate about AI and the future of user experience. All right, Nick, if you were to sum up your experience over these past 2 decades of UX design and product strategy, what would that be like?
Lee, do you know the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, that sort of constant cycle of reimagine and reinvention? I'm sure it has many deeper meanings than the one I'm describing, but I feel like the last 20 years has been this constant change where that which we thought we knew now gets turned into something else. And I think some of it is, with technology, you have to evolve. Technology doesn't stay still. Technology rapidly, it goes as fast as it can. And that uh, is awesome because there are points of inspiration and wonder and amazement, but it is also extremely unnerving sometimes because the ground that you thought was solid, you turn around and all of a sudden it's liquid. So that describes the last 20 years of, wow, you really got to keep up. You got to hustle.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah.
Absolutely, man. Times have changed, and with this, evolution of AI, I think it's going to get even more crazy, even more liquid, right? So, I guess walk me through, how you got into design, and I guess how it led you to where you're at right now.
Yeah, from a very young age, I had some moments of, and these could have been as small as like 10 or 15 minutes in my life. Like, I look back at them as these pivotal cornerstone moments, but they could have been these fleeting, sort of random bits of time that just had some prescience and some reflection. And I was, at an after school Cub Scouts activity. For those of you listening in from overseas, Cub Scouts is a small sort of youth development. They teach you, to be responsible citizens.
Hmm.
And the den moms, as we called them, were in charge of supervising our activities. And we were, the 8 of us were sitting at a table drawing. Uh,
Hmm.
After, again, what could have been as short as 15 minutes, I looked around and I thought, wow, I really invested in my drawing. And it was a dogfight of Spitfires and Messerschmitts, and I was into sort of air combat at the time. And I thought, my 10-year-old self thought, wow, there's something here like that. You keep doing this. This is some visually, you really cared about expressing the scene. You really made the flames seem real. Uh, and that was, I consider myself fortunate to have that kind of like, oh, here's a direction. Like this doesn't suck. And
Hmm.
we're in the summertime is when we're recording this, and this is the time where kids go to camp and they sort
Hmm.
of spend those idle days of, hopefully doing things that don't suck, and they kind of realize like, oh, I want to find out more and do more about this. And so I was fortunate and privileged enough to have an environment where I was exposed to those kinds of things and those kinds of environments.
Hmm.
And it sort of went on and on and on. And I always, regardless of where I'm at in my career, look back to that 10-year-old and thought, oh no, there was something there that you assembled and pivoted and balanced, and the snake eating its tail, always became fluid to something else.
Absolutely. Like that inspiration when we're children, a lot of times can go away with the expectation of our parents, right? Sometimes our parents want us to go into a certain career path and, maybe our peers are all doing something else and we kind of have that FOMO. We want to be following careers, that they get into. We see money and we're like, oh, this is more lucrative. I had a similar experience. I decided in high school I was going to pursue business instead of astronomy because I figured it'd be easier to get, into a business degree. But
Mhm.
I guess after high school and everything, what made you want to pursue a career in that design field specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it ties back. Uh, well, after college, let's say, you know, when you're at university, you sort of have this sort of raw material of an idea, at
Mm.
least in my experience.
Yeah.
Uh, I returned back to the San Francisco Bay Area in 1998, 99,
Mm.
and this explosion was happening, much like it is today, which is a conversation we'll have in a few minutes.
Yep.
But I came back to my native Bay Area at the time when this thing called the internet was starting to have rumbles about like, oh, no, this is real. Like this isn't just for Pentagon or porn. Like this is actually something that has some wide ranging impact.
Mm.
And because I had sort of continued on that drawing class of life and stayed in the visual arts and human computer interaction and took those classes to really further that sort
Mm.
of focus, and again privileged enough to have the early Apple computers at my fingertips because they were built in the backyard of the Silicon Valley. And so that merging of visual arts and technology was exploding with the
Mhm.
introduction of a Netscape browser that allowed you to see pictures and do things. And so the design community at the time was asking themselves, do you want to be a designer for a magazine and print and posters and all the tactical, wonderful smell, touch things
Mhm.
really hold design? Or do you want to go into this world of light and
Right.
interaction? And I had loved the technology. And so I went for the latter and really went
Yeah.
head first back in the year 2000, to say, yeah, this is how I want to appropriate visual design and art and I'm going to build software.
That's
You know,
amazing. And you started your career at the time of like the dot-com bubble, right?
yeah,
That's when you started your consultancy, is that correct?
I I was the bubble blew me out. So March of 2001 for you technology history buffs was the antitrust ruling. I think Europe said to Microsoft, you can't just own everything. You have to decouple the browser with the operating system and the Outlook. Like you can't just have it all. And that sent shockwaves to what was an overhyped technology stock market. You think of like the socks, the pets.com sock puppet and the Super Bowl ads and
Hmm.
the Excite at home, the explosions of IPOs that were happening. But it caused this at least momentary cratering of a hype cycle in the market here in San Francisco. And so a lot of people who had their first job, myself included, I worked for a company called Alta Vista, which was before Google.
Hmm.
I worked on the first image search on the web.
Wow.
Um, and so a lot of that wipeout happened. Um, Temporarily you're having to hustle, and so it's like, all right, like what does mean being a freelancer? Wow, it's actually pretty good. You can make a lot of hourly money and I don't need a 401k because I'm 22. And like, this, like it was really a fun way to see a lot of different places and a lot of different business models and workplaces and environments and meet a lot of different people and have to jump in and sell yourself and really make sure you're able to quote do it, not just talk about it.
Hmm.
And that's been my whole career, is bouncing in and out of full-time work, and either getting laid off or fired or moving on, and then seeing maybe I can earn an income just by the hair of my chin and the straps of my boot, uh,
Hmm.
by being a consultant or having a consultancy. The differences between freelancing and contracting and consulting are very thin.
Right.
It's really just trying to see what you can do for somebody else.
So what was one of the most exciting projects that you worked on early on in your career that kind of like shaped who you are today as a designer?
I'm going to answer those questions separately. The one that was dearest to my heart was to design the intranet for the local baseball team. Like I'm a baseball fan. I sort of grew up playing the game and I coached for a while. And because I had volunteered for the Olympic bids here in San Francisco, they tried to get the 2012. Went to London 2016. I think went to Rio.
Rio, I
Uh,
think.
in 2024, I went to Paris.
Mm.
And they tried and failed to get all three of those summer games bids. But I met people in my volunteering. They needed a webmaster or digital lead, or somebody that knew computers pretty well.
Mm.
And that was me. And I cold called their office because I saw like a news article on television, and I called them up. I said, "What can I do for you?" And they said, "Well, this is the 2012 bid, and so this is early 2000s. They're trying to get the games of 2012." And they said, "Well, New York has just come out with this thing called a Flash movie, and it's this animation of why New York should get the bid. Can you do one of those for us?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I can figure out how to use macro media." That led me to business contacts, which put me in touch with the CIO still of the San Francisco Giants. And I was able to work inside of the baseball stadium for, 6 or 8 months. And, it was just surreal to me
Mm.
that there's a feeling that you're walking from work, in this case the baseball stadium. The city is alive. It's a crisp fall evening, and you just think like, oh, okay, things are happening, like I'm able to do this, I'm able to figure this out. Um and I look back at that as being a very special engagement. Um What's been challenging, this is the second part of the question. The
Mhm.
first one was, well, what was the most interesting one? And this one is, how did it involve design, or how did it challenge the discipline of the craft?
Mhm.
Uh, from the design standpoint, the fact that you have to start leaving design behind, and it becomes now a process. And this goes into the ugly buzzword of management consulting,
Mm.
where, okay, my deliverable is a journey map, it's a customer journey, it's service design. And so instead of designing all the things, I'm showing a process, and I'm designing a qualitative research approach for which I can gather and generate ideas and strategies that lead into that process. And these were, big stakes. This was a sort of global consultancy that had brought me in to do this kind of strategic recommendation.
Mhm.
And it's a bit unnerving when it's not all about deliverable, it's as much about the process and the politics. But you can fall back on your ability to communicate visually, and get a lot of headway in that context.
Yeah, like you said, communication is everything. And as a designer, we need to be able to take the ideas out of our head and put it on paper or put it into a software program so people
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a situation where you had a big failure that taught you a lot about, design or, your career or anything like that?
Yeah, I always, and this may just be imposter syndrome, I've always been so sort of beating myself up about demand generation, and sort of seeding new relationships and new conversations, the funnel, that kind of things. I've been a crafts person, so I really care about the deliverable. And
Mm.
I think at times that takes away from, hey, just sell the thing. Just
Mm.
just sell it to as many people as possible, and then the deliverable will take care of itself. But if I, again, don't beat myself up about it, and I look at relationships that I've made and maintained, the same ones that I've talked about in the early 2000s are still relationships to this day,
Mm.
and say, you're not going for the quantity and the scale and the commoditization of the service. You're instead going for the investment and the trust that
Mm.
comes into maintaining a true and honest relationship, for people who will give you business down the road. And so
Mm.
this is a sort of classic interview technique of turning a failure into a success. But I think that, those shortcomings, as I perceive them, may not always be true in the long term.
And I feel like a lot of people sometimes are perfectionists, and that's to their detriment, right? They think that when they're designing something, it has to be perfect before they ship it.
Mhm.
That's what a lot of
Oh,
founders, struggle with, especially. What are
yeah.
what is, yeah, I guess some of your advice for people who are stuck in that kind of mindset?
Success uh, is something that changes. Your measure of success may be different one year to the next, one week to the next. So really examine what it means, or constantly examine what it means to feel like you're succeeding, or that your goals, or those things that I'll give you my personal experience is that, when I went into this consultancy, this current corporate structure of it, my
Mhm.
idea of success was multiple employees and really sort of making
Mhm.
this sort of boss man a reality. But no, that's not necessarily success. I mean, I you need to generate enough revenue and income to make sure the lights stay on and you have the tools that you need,
Mhm.
but that doesn't necessarily mean having a dozen employees. That just means having the balance so that you can do some of the work and do some of the management and feel like it's going to be something that um, is maintainable. My
Mhm.
biggest fear is, Lee Jean, you're hired. Here's your contract. Good luck. Here's our project. And then 6 months later, it's like, sorry, you made those decisions in your life to come work for me. And now the contract went away and I got to say goodbye. Is to
Ah.
take somebody down a road and make them think that it's going to be a long journey when in fact, the agency world pivots and changes so rapidly, it's
Mhm.
hard to know where that income stream. Now, that being said, I've had subcontractors that have worked for me for years. One currently in her third year, but it's just a relationship that is like, look, I wish I knew how far this went, how long this was going to go for, but it's really sort of fluid in terms of sometimes we have three clients and sometimes we have no clients. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's them's the breaks.
When you're a freelancer, especially, like managing your emotions during those times where you have so many clients and you have tons of money coming in, but then those down times as well, where you have
Yep.
nothing coming in, can be very, very challenging and stressful, especially
Mm.
for people who are just coming from that corporate environment
Yep.
and setting out on their own. How do you manage those expectations, or how do you manage those emotions? Yeah.
Yeah, those times are perfect opportunities to pivot or to reimagine or to rethink of what am I doing? What do I want to do differently? Because now I've been given this license of this gap. And if things are good or not horrible, that gap is going to close and you're going to go back into a contract because your phone rings and you didn't expect it. And you're like, oh, there goes that ambiguity. Now
Hmm.
it's all in and I'm going to be so committed to this engagement. But that period of ambiguity can be extremely stressful because it's anxious and you don't know when it's going to end. But after enough muscle memories, you start to think, this is my opportunity to reimagine, to reskill, to retrain, to rethink, and get myself ready because I know that time is going to be finite. I hope that time is going to be finite.
Hmm.
Um, and and it can be seen as I often talk with those corporate drones that have chosen the enterprise path, where they go from one enterprise job to another enterprise job to another enterprise. It seems incapable that they would do anything else than chase the paycheck. And
Hmm.
I know that I trade the anxiety of ambiguity for control. And
Hmm.
right now, I have as much control as I want. I can do anything. I can start to sell widgets on the internet if I think it's a good idea. And I can
Hmm.
invest 40 hours a week in getting my widget company up and running because I have the control to run this thing into the ground.
Hmm.
Whereas when you're in the enterprise in this corporate world, you've lost all control. Oftentimes you've lost control of your schedule, where you're just back to back meetings. You've lost control of what projects that you work on, what
Hmm.
those outcomes typically are, and the anxiety comes with the loss of control. So I know that it's a balance, and that ambiguity can be scary and anxious, but with that comes the control over your own destiny.
Actually, you bring up a really good point about control. I was listening to another podcast recently when they talked about being able to say no to certain things, and even sometimes no to more money than, you're originally expecting, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes, you'll have a client who's offering you a ton of money for a project, but then that project doesn't align with your values, right? Can
yeah,
you talk about maybe a situation in your past where you've had to say no to some sort of
yeah.
project, and I guess how how you manage those emotions?
Yeah, best feeling in the world is being able to fire a client.
Mm.
Like, it's not working out. And one recently was they were trying to shop a bigger fish where they wanted to make themselves seem larger than they were.
Hmm.
Uh, And so the enterprise client would come to them and said, "Oh, you've got all this staff. Here's a bunch of work." But that sort of fear of perception caused them to make some very weird decisions in terms of how they used us. So we came on to help supplement their team, myself, another person whom I trust and whom I admire.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, the like, don't say these kinds of things in meetings because they expose that you two are white labeled and we're not really having you as a full-time employee. And so at some point we just said, look, man, you are sort of walking on eggshells and we're just trying to do good work and make
Mhm.
relationships. And you
Mhm.
know, how awesome would it look for you if you brought on these two all stars and really enabled the account? Who
Yep.
cares if they're going to be on W2 or 1099? They're here and they're invested. And it
Exactly.
was just, it was wrong. Like
Mhm.
that personality didn't fit. And
Yep.
we made amicable separation of the engagement, but like was just not a good fit because they were playing games. And to their credit, they eventually sold their agency.
There
um,
you go. Yeah.
but
You know deep down, right? You have that intuitive feeling that this
yeah,
wasn't.
you don't want to hesitate or double think or try to stutter. You want to do good work, and whatever it means to sell yourself would be really helpful. So yeah, that's an engagement where it didn't work out. I don't know if it caused a failure. Certainly there was money left on the table, but it was it's why independence feels good, is that you can make those decisions.
And yeah, being able to say no ultimately gives you a lot of freedom, right?
Yeah,
You're free to work on other projects that are more meaningful for your values and for your future and things like that.
yeah,
So one of the things that actually is going on in the Bay Area is that, I think it's Facebook or Meta, right? They're going around and offering $100 million, right? Like
right.
signing bonuses for AI
Yeah.
researchers. What's going on over there?
I,
Like,
I have dinner with an engineering manager tomorrow. Going down to Palo Alto and meeting her for a dinner. Okay, so it's an arms race for AI. Zuckerberg did this last time when he wanted to make the metaverse.
yep.
Remember that? Like that
Mhm.
was all like avatars and space and wearables and things like that. And now attention has focused into this super intelligence lab or um, I wouldn't believe the numbers. I do believe the recruitment effort. OpenAI also is hiring very aggressively. There, an engineering manager there made this joke about when he was at Lyft,
Mhm.
when the times were good, and the way that he describes his position currently, where you have subsidized electric bicycles to take you to and from work, and it's valet service, and there's everything you can imagine, the pamper treatment. But at Lyft, he knew the writing was on the wall when they stopped giving away free avocados. When it's like, and so there's this like avocado moment where once they took those away, or the guacamole, it's like uh-oh, something's wrong. And then layoff after layoff after layoff. So it's a hype cycle. And, in order to fuel the hype cycle, you want to get some people on board. And same thing with, Johnny Ivy and the device that will be named later. Like I think you want to show to your investors as well. It's like a
Yeah.
sports team. You got to sign stars to make the board make it look like you're doing something. Whether or not translates into winning or losing matches, I don't know. But it it's just another cycle. But that being said, I think that uh artificial intelligence has much more legs than, say, the metaverse or blockchain or NFTs or any of those sort of previous waves of hype that have come across the bow of technology here in San Francisco.
Yeah, AI is the definition of disruptive innovation. It is disrupting literally every facet of our life at the moment. And I think it's going to
Yep.
get even more, crazy, right? In design, specifically UX design, how
Mhm.
has it impacted the way you approach UX design, and how do you think it will impact you in the future? Yeah.
Substantially. I will never go into Figma again. Maybe go to Miro and just do some blocking. Um, also have had a current project where I bring in components from existing libraries. I tell the algorithm to say, okay, just use these libraries, don't bring in any external ones. And I bring in all my building blocks, and then I tell using dictation, building block, building block, building block, building block. And if you need to create something new, stop and ask. So
Mm,
it's now a lot less visual to start, but much more sort of real to generate. We had this sort of inflection moment, the Altamont. For those of you who know your 1960s U.S. history, where we had the Summer of Love here in the Bay Area, where it was peace, love, um, and happiness, and man had walked on the moon.
yeah.
There were all these sort of wonderful cultural moments that was going on amongst hippies and flower children. And then this band called the Rolling Stones decided they wanted to throw a free concert, much like the Grateful Dead did in Golden Gate Park, but they did it with like 2 days' notice. They went to a racetrack about an hour and a half outside of San Francisco, something like 300,000 people, no tickets, just all drove and went to this concert in which several people were killed. It was this sort of end of the 1960s moment because it was so poorly organized and executed. Um, I think that the design community just experienced its ultimate at Config 2025 because it was this explosion of a design community, and Figma is going to go public in the next 6 months as a company, and there's this sort of underlying of like, are we really using these tools? It has very minimal alpha scale integration with Cursor or MCPs. Like it's so broken the way that these tools are being used in a silo that we call design, and that
Mm,
gap between what development needs and what design is doing is massive. But there
mm,
are these tools that can come in and replace that, provided you understand the visual skills and the variables and the states and the conditions and the logic, and are able to communicate and
mm.
author this new um, abstraction. Um, but I think that the design community will adapt and learn and train and really accommodate for, again, going back to my initial analogy of that liquidity in a landscape, because to say that, oh, I'm really good at Figma is not going to get you far. It's no, I understand the technology and the output and the development of it more than I do just the visual representation.
Wow. So, you said that you're using like dictation to literally dictate the designs and what you want the computer to design for you. How accurate do you think the technology is right now? And how often do you need to get in there and like get your hands dirty with some design work?
The dictation is just saves you from typing a little bit. There are parameters in which you reference entities in
Yeah.
a component list or a
Mhm.
variable list, and that requires going in and making sure that
Mhm.
the prompt understands what it is you're talking about. But it's been very good. Um, how often do I go in and get my hands dirty? I think I'm playing in a sandbox right now, and it's just full of dirt. It's in my hair, it's in my nose, and what I'm understanding is where do you set the guardrails and the parameters and the boundaries, so that what it is that you're designing really will save time on the
Mm,
development standpoint.
mm,
That's done responsibly. That has all the variables and components that one typically does
mm,
in Figma, but is being used within the application itself. We've spent the last 10 years as a design community creating these pattern libraries. Is all systems design and design patterns and components and blocks and atoms and all of this way of structurally thinking about design. And was absolutely the right thing to do. But what we've done is now train systems, whether or not we realized it, we provided it structure and assembly so that when the pattern recognition algorithm, which these computers, these services are excellent at,
mhm.
now understands exactly what it is we're referring to or talking about, and can give us 5 options from Sunday about what we want to use.
It's incredible, man. Yeah, I mean, technology's making our lives so easy every single day. I wonder, you teach and mentor other designers, right? What are
Mhm.
you, I guess, telling them about AI and their future in design, and how would you go about advising them on, making a career in design in this era of AI?
Yeah, the most recent engagement over the last 6 months was with a recent graduate of CCA, my alma mater here in San Francisco, and she had spent 4 years doing design in Figma. And I think I was her first contract out of school.
Mm,
And it's like, okay, 35 hours a week, Fortune 500 company. By the way, the last time I worked with this company, I gave them all these Figma comps. And, 2 years went by, and I came back to see what those comps had turned into. And because it was an internal tool, because the resources and the prioritization and the skills of the developers weren't great, those comps just fell over.
mm,
And what was delivered from the development team was looked like it was done without any sort of design direction. So
yeah,
the fault was on us. The fault was on me, is that I painted this pretty picture, but in reality, it wasn't able to be built.
mm,
And so I said to this graduate, we're not making that same mistake again. What we're going to give the development team is going to be much closer to what they can implement so that that doesn't happen. That gap between design and development doesn't continue to exist. And oh, by the way, there are all these tools that want to do that for us.
mm,
We're fortunate enough to have email addresses with the company and be able to pull down their component library of already built design components, to pull down Storybook to understand their CSS, their Tailwind variables,
mm,
and use that as our language model for which we would create applications from. So instead of going through their corporate design review process where we submit a component, it gets in a queue. Sometime within the next couple of weeks, they review that component, they give it back to us for feedback. We make the revisions, it goes back to design, they do review it, and they say, yep, this is a new component, and we'll give it to development, and development will develop that component, which could take 3, 4 weeks. We had a 6 month contract to build an entire application. So we couldn't wait for that type of traditional
mm,
enterprise design flow. And so by taking live code and saying, this is what we're generating our design from, we just skipped over that whole validation process and went straight to referencing live code.
mm,
So your original question is what would you tell the junior designers coming out? And it's the flexibility involved, and it's the understanding is that your tool or your artifact, Figma is one in a series of 25 that I've used in the last 20 years.
mm,
They change every 6 to 12 months. Now, Figma was fantastic during its time. But now there are these other tools that have different paradigms and different metaphors for which
mm.
we need to figure out how to use.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that anyone at this stage, within the education system, they need to realize that sometimes like the curriculum is behind what's actually happening in the real world.
Oh,
They need
yeah.
to like seek out internships. They need to seek out stuff while they're studying to make sure that they're learning stuff that's current.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that is super, super important what you said. Like, just staying up to the times and getting rapidly like learning right when you get out of university is super
Yeah.
important. What my fear is that these AI agents that are all coming out now, they're going to make a lot of junior level positions obsolete. My worry is that how can somebody get to that senior level experience, to that mid-level experience without getting a job in the first place?
Mm. Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, make your own business, make your own company, just to like showcase the design for, yeah, I built all of this. Like,
Mm,
that's not a theoretical project or a portfolio piece or one widget for one company. That's no, I can do this soup to nuts. And if
mm,
you want to see an example, you can copy me because I've got it all figured out. So
mm.
that power, the way you're describing about junior designers willing to climb the ladder up to a senior level position, uh, you got a jetpack. You don't need a ladder.
That's true. That's true. You know, I think, hopefully the education system will catch up so that we can get more people to that stage. But I'm actually excited about this AI era because anyone
Yeah,
can be an entrepreneur now. Anyone can be a freelancer. Anyone can, just get out and do their own thing. And I think there is a huge push, especially here in Japan, for entrepreneurship.
yeah,
Obviously, in the US, it's been there forever, but yeah, I think AI is empowering people, not taking people away, as long as they're not just so fearful of it and, objecting to you.
yeah. The comments that I've heard of creatives not wanting to use AI is that it will steal your soul. Of like, yeah, there's something about toiling and thinking about it and the craft. Um, but I think there's also something about realizing where you can find those shortcuts and efficiency, and then go and be an editor versus a writer.
Right.
And now you're just sort of manipulating the deliverable versus stacking it one by one. We had a this is dating me as if I haven't already dated myself. When the first digital transformation came around, there was a wave of people that didn't trust the cloud. And maybe it was because the infrastructure wasn't quite there and something got lost or something got erased, and it happened once and they never trusted it. And so they wanted to see their files on their desktop because that meant it existed. Never
Hmm.
mind you that the laptop could get corrupted or the hard drive could break or the file could get corrupted. And there was as much danger of keeping something locally as there was in cloud storage.
Hmm.
But their skills stopped because they couldn't use anything but spreadsheets for things like CRMs or time tracking or anything that we just now take for granted as SaaS platforms.
Hmm.
And I wonder if AI is going to have the same sort of like, I don't trust the algorithm. There's ethical concerns. There's also there's the environmental concerns about using these tools.
Yep.
That there'll be a certain divide of like scary place, very murky, not quite sure. I'm going to just stick with what I know, and that's stacking it up one by one.
Absolutely. And that's a huge issue because it's moving too rapidly. And if you just are so hesitant to use it, you're going to be way far behind.
Yep.
In this AI era, there's no time for laggards. Like you have to be an early adopter and everything that comes out, you got to play with it and just understand how to use it, get an understanding. I did a talk recently about education and how, parents should be learning this stuff so that they can teach their kids outside of school if they're not learning it already because their jobs are gonna get replaced with AI. Imagine their kids who are learning something that's going to become obsolete. So
Yep.
I think it's super important.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
role of AI in schools and homework, and where if the teachers are using to create their assignments, should the students use it to answer those assignments? Like where does that boundary fall?
Ooh.
It's going to be. I've got a 14-year-old and a 9-year-old, and
Hmm.
I remember the aha moment. Maybe this goes back to the Cub Scouts visual moment, where my son needed to create for a history class a table of projectiles, uh, who created them and their range. And so, he sat down with his pen and made his table. And
Hmm.
then I was sort of on the counter and I say, hey, watch this. And I typed in 2 sentences into ChatGPT to give me a table
Huh.
historically, everything from the Stone Age to intercontinental ballistic missiles. And
Oh.
it just like, and I remember him just stunned. And I closed the laptop and he blinks. He's like, could you open that up and do that again? Like, nope. Like, there it was. Like, just so you know, like that's
Yeah.
your research tool. So I don't know if I've created a monster or
That's
an idiot,
insane.
but
I mean, that's his future, man. That's the
yeah,
future, right? He'll be able to get any question that he has answered in seconds.
yeah,
And what that worries me is like, what's the point of university? Our point of university is to learn something, right? Is to
mhm,
actually learn and gain knowledge. But if you have questions, really good questions, you
mhm.
can get that knowledge instantly. You
Well,
know?
tell
Mm.
you something, Lee Jean. The best compliment that anybody ever gives me is, you ask good questions.
Hmm.
And I love it when people tell me that because, as you said, maybe university becomes, we got to know what questions to ask now.
Hmm.
There's so much answer out there, some of which are right, some of which aren't right. It's going to be hard to tell which is right, which isn't. but now we have to understand how to ask the question.
100%. Questions make us learn, right? And they help deepen our knowledge within the topics. And I think, AI is all about prompting.
Yeah,
That should be a subject in school is how to prompt AI to get what you need.
yeah,
And I really, as a teacher, I feel really bad for the education system because
yeah.
we are just not teaching things that are keeping up with the times at all. Uh,
COVID was hard for elementary school teachers. You were either on the side of the digital divide where you knew how to conduct Zoom classes, or you didn't because you've been an elementary school teacher for 25 years and you never did that.
yeah.
And so that was a pretty hard cut between one and the other.
So one of the things I want to chat about, which came up in my last podcast episode, was the fact that everything that happens in Silicon Valley and everything that happens in the US is usually ahead of the curve. And then in Japan, we get, information like 3 to 6 months later. What are some trends that you're seeing in the Bay Area now that we should be looking out for here in Japan?
I mean, I would challenge that. I would challenge that being an advantage. I
Mm,
think like waving your hands wildly and shouting isn't the strongest source of signal, which I feel like we do in the US. It's like, and I mentioned like several archaic, obsolete, irrelevant technologies of which these marketing waves were just shouting, and like not everybody should adapt uh,
mm,
because it's something that people are using to raise money or
mm,
relabel their products. So to say that here's something that's coming down the road, um, I will. There was something that last week that stood out, and that's the introduction of uh, algorithms as, I'll call them app stores, but platforms for which now you can bring other products or other integrations into and use the algorithms to reference this provided data. We
mm,
saw that in 2008 to 2010, this introduction of an app store and billionaires overnight that got some sort of thing right and
mhm,
understood how people use this technology. And so
mm,
now we're going from these sort of closed ecosystems or these closed platforms into ones that are integrated and open. And developers can figure out what it is they want to provide the beast, on, whether it be Anthropic or OpenAI or Cursor,
mhm,
like to say that this is going to be something we can build off of. And
mm,
so we've seen that pattern before. Um, we saw it with Macintosh operating systems, and now iOS and Android and all that, and now it's coming into this world of algorithms. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how these are all starting to play with each other because there's also a lot of like white labeling. I've used that word before of companies that are building companies based off of Anthropic or OpenAI's product, where you've now got like a Lovable is Claude on the back end, or like you just got these companies that are using uh, using the big boys, the big partners to make smaller products from. So that kind of consolidation and repurposing, I think, is a an evidence of of a very wealthy landscape.
wow. Yeah. So what my understanding of that is that you're saying that there's going to be like algorithm kind of app stores or stuff that people will be able to use an already existing algorithm to build their own application. Is that it?
There was two parts in that. One
Mm,
was there's going to be app stores or integrations for which now there's a vetting process in which if I live within an ecosystem of a prompt tool, I can bring in verified sources of reference and applications and integrations and actions that occur within that environment. And the second is more what's been happening already is that everybody's rushed to market to be an AI product doesn't mean that they each have their own language models.
right.
Is that some use one and some use the other, but the ones that they use are very few and far between.
Hmm.
It's just we the technology industry has such pressure to be AI innovative. And
Yep.
they say, well, if we do something on our back end that calls Anthropic and returns what we need to display on our end, that it makes it look like we're an AI based company when it's really Anthropic that's providing the skills and the service. And so that kind of, I guess, division of labor or sort of identification of where that source of truth is something that again seem at the forefront of conversation these days.
Very, very interesting, man. Yeah, I'm very like excited for the future, I think, with AI and like the possibilities as an entrepreneur and as somebody
Mhm.
who's always looking to build something big. You know, I got my hands dirty with a couple of tools such as Replit and like, all
Yeah.
the things where you can literally vibe code or like prompt to get an app. But
Hmm.
it's very limited in terms of my knowledge with regards to like how to get it from just something that's on my computer to something deployed. I think that aspect
Yeah.
needs to be simpler, but
Yeah.
it is crazy, like I was able to
Mhm.
visually see something that an idea in my
Yeah.
head. I don't need a developer anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very, very interesting the way that we're going. Yeah, so for me here in Japan, I've seen the industry grow, and like I just been in Japan for like a year and a couple months, and when I got here, I was so excited because Japan's really pushing for entrepreneurship, is really pushing for growth of startups and unicorns and all those type things. There's tons of events that you can go to every day. But I want to hear from you, like, how's the community there in, San Francisco? I've only been there just for traveling, nothing for startup related, but
Yeah.
I would imagine there's events happening every single day and like the networking must be out of control, or is it like
Yeah.
very clicky and like does it feel, I guess, kind of, I don't know, like, the cool kids are over here and the other kids are like over here,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
wish I knew where the cool kids were. They left and had me sitting on the couch by myself.
Uh,
Uh, I could tell you that early in my career, interaction designers was what I was doing. I
mm,
was organizing the San Francisco chapter. We had something like 5,000 members within our chapter. It was hugely important. And I got to meet my mentors
mm,
because they had books and they had products and they had job openings and they wanted to speak to a room of several hundred people. And so to be an MC and a liaison for that community and to bring in all these talks and speakers was it was a forming function.
mm.
Now, a lot of people there were because the pizza was free, the beer was free, and
Hey,
they wanted to meet dates. And like there was a
yeah.
secondary notion to why networking after work made sense. But it was really a important part of one's identity to know where you were and who you were around and who your contemporaries were. And that was like there are no interaction designers anymore. It's not a career or a path that people say this is what I do. It's product design or now design or
Mhm.
design engineer or prompt and like there it could be those job titles are going to change extremely rapidly. Context engineering, I think, is the popular one this week. Um,
Context
but
engineering.
I think Lee, you're hitting upon something that's very important, and that with all of this chaos in the job application,
Mm,
how to get jobs and how to find candidates, because the signal and the noise is so confusing right now.
mhm,
In-person meetings to go out and make sure that you're networking and you're looking human beings in the eye to say, "Oh yeah, that's interesting. That company sounds cool. Oh yeah, that's an
mhm,
interesting job." I think that is going to be how you succeed is to make those personal connections and to take the effort of finding which space you are
mhm.
comfortable in, because it'll be more and more harder to figure out the real from the fake online, but the job you'll get will likely be from a referral or somebody you meet along the way.
Honestly, I'm super, worried about like, people, especially on social media, with the Google VO3, like
Mhm.
the ability to make videos with sound that looks so
Yep.
real. It's hard to distinguish reality from not reality anymore.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm really worried about that. But I think, like you said, like having in-person connections and social interactions, learning those social skills are super important. And some of the stuff that I teach here in Japan, because, Japan really needs it, right? In terms of
Mhm.
interacting with others. And I think that technology can either divide us or bring us together. And, social media was supposed to bring us together, but I feel it's dividing us even more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
crucial, crucial skill that I think that you just brought up. So, Nick, we've talked a lot about AI, we've talked a lot about design. Is there anything that, we didn't talk about that you think we should have talked about?
Yeah. I think another thing I wanted to call into is that notion of success.
Mm.
And I know you've got a segment in which you ask the next guest. Did I get asked my question from the
No,
previous
not
guest
yet.
yet?
Not
Okay.
yet.
All right. Then I'm going to hold off on that until that, because those notions of perceptions and success, I think, were a good uh, to go when the landscape's uncertain. It's always good for self-examination.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. So if you were to just, define your definition of success, what would
yeah.
that be? What would that be?
It is the ability, it's the ambiguity versus control, right? The ability to find that balance between the two. I know what I love is to go in and figure out a problem,
Mm,
a fix. I want to feel validated. I want to feel important. And so the way that I go about doing that is to try to figure out how to fix something. And
mm,
if I'm in an environment in which I don't get to do that, then I wouldn't feel like I was successful. Um, that's something that uh again, that the notion changes as you age, as you go on in your career, as you enter in new
mm,
related disciplines. There's been several times where I've sidestepped my way into mixed methods research and
mhm,
management consulting, and you just sort of sidestep your way of like, "Doop, doop, 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 doop. I'm going to go see if I can succeed doing this." Like
mm,
I think I could hum it. So
mhm.
why couldn't I succeed in doing it? So that's coming off of good project completions for things you were very uncomfortable with at the beginning was always a really good feeling.
Absolutely. Overcoming that challenge and being able to help somebody, especially somebody that has meaningful work for you to do, I think is super important. What I worry is that a lot of these problems will be able to be fixed by AI. What purpose will people get after that? You know?
I was asked by somebody this week, have I ever had an AI girlfriend? A serious question. And I was like, no, no. May have watched deep fake porn, but I don't think it was an AI. I don't think that counts as a girlfriend.
Right, exactly.
I didn't realize it at the time. Um, so maybe that becomes commonplace where we just need to be heard one way or the other,
Yeah.
and the algorithm will help us collect our thoughts.
There's this, I don't know if you've heard of this one, one called Sesame, it's a conversational AI. The
Mhm.
voice is so human-like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is the trend that's gonna go down.
Mm.
Absolutely. All right, cool, man. So I'm going, as you alluded to, the last person left a question for you, and you'll leave a question for the next guest. Okay. So, are
Okay.
you ready for your question?
I am.
Okay. So this question is about expectations versus reality. Okay.
Mm.
So what did you think, I guess UX design, or you can talk about freelancing or
Mhm.
entrepreneurship as you
Yeah.
are, was, and how do you feel now that you are a UX designer, freelancer, entrepreneur compared to what you originally envisioned?
Yeah. One pivotal moment was proactive versus reactive, where I mentioned those sort of losses of jobs or layoffs or firings or whatever it may be, where it's reactive. And you're sitting there thinking, oh shit, I just lost my source of income and I need to react by doing this or
Mm,
that or figuring myself out. And that's kind of your expectation of like, I just got to make things up because it's going to take me 6 months to find a job, so I might as well just try to make things up in between now and then.
mhm,
And the difference between being reactive and proactive is to say, if I were to do this with a repeating pattern, how would I do it? And instead of like just using it as a bridge to the next thing, what happens if this tries to continue for as long as it can?
mhm,
And to answer your question a little bit more directly, uh, my expectation was is that I could just fill this in. But the reality is you have to be all in. You have to be all in until the money runs out. And then even then you've got to figure out how to bridge it to the next contract or that next client.
mm,
Because if you're going to put your feet into both camps and say, well, I'll just sort of hustle until the job hunt picks up, or I'll just sort of stay in the game until somebody gives me a call, it's somewhat like it's the worst of both worlds because you don't have that investment, and you're still waiting for that that alternative.
Mm,
And so I that's that's different than I expected. I didn't it what there's a Brazilian term called total football where it's just all inclusive and consuming.
mm.
Um, and I think that that's something I didn't expect, but it does mandate a leap of faith, and that's why I call it a leap of faith, not a tiptoe of faith.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Entrepreneurship definitely is a leap of faith. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be all in for sure. All
Yeah.
right, man. So now it's your turn to leave a question for the next guest. Yes.
Yeah, well, let's cover some of those topics we discussed. Is that how does your next guest of Lee Jean, how does your definition of success differ from where it began? What
Mm,
has changed in how you see success in freelancing entrepreneurship? Just how you go about your business life. How does that change over time?
awesome. That's a great question. Yeah, because I think, people's, definition of success definitely changes every single, it's like a moving goalpost, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's never enough, right? We just need to more and more and more success. But yeah, that's a very interesting question to ask them. Well, Nick, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I learned a lot about obviously your background and AI and design today, and it's been really great to hear your experience. And I appreciate you for coming on, man.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on, Lee Jean. Pleasure to meet you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Product Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps this channel grow. And if you are a product manager or a startup founder who wants to share your story or some of the struggles that you've gone through in your career, then definitely reach out to us. We'd love to have you on. And until next time, happy building, everyone.